Act 1. Kaladin Stormblessed. Take a look at this image. Seriously, look at it. If you stumble across this art on Pinterest without knowing anything about Stormlight Archive, you probably think, oh, awesome, another overpowered anime protagonist. He's got the epic wind-blown hair, a glowing spear, and he casually chilling on a stone pillar while a literal high storm rages behind him. He looks like a god. But if you have actually read Brandon Sanderson's books, you look at this image and you see something entirely different. You don't see an overpowered god. You see a 20-something-year-old kid who is running on absolute fumes, pure spite, and enough psychological trauma to keep an entire convention of modern therapists employed for a century. Notice the expression the artist gave him here. There's a profound weariness in his eyes. He isn't smiling, he isn't gloating. Even surrounded by magical glowing stormlight, he looks like a man who is carrying the weight of an entire world on his shoulders. And that's because for 5 massive books, he basically has been. To understand the high-flying, spear-wielding Radiant, we have to start where his journey truly begins. At the bottom of the chasm. The honor chasm. When he first meet Kaladin in the Way of Kings, he isn't a hero, he's a slave. He's been stripped of his freedom, marked with the brands of a deserter on his forehead, and forced to carry massive wooden bridges across the shattered plains. His job is literally to run naked into the hail of Pershendi arrows so that the elite light-eyed army can cross safely behind him. He watches his friends die every single day, and he is entirely consumed by an internal monster he calls the Wretch. Now, what makes Sanderson's writing so incredible here is that the Wretch isn't a magical fantasy curse, it's an incredibly accurate, painfully realistic depiction of clinical depression. When you're trapped in the darkest headspace, depression robs you of your identity. It feels like an external entity, a monster living in your brain that devalues every success and magnifies every failure. The Wretch constantly whispers to Kaladin, "Why bother trying? Everyone you love is going to die anyway. Just give up." And so he stands at the edge of the honors chasm, ready to step off into the blackness. He's done. But what saves him isn't a magical sword dropping from the sky. It isn't a grand booming speech from the Almighty. It's a tiny glowing windspread named Sulfrina, bringing him a single dried black leaf. You can hear it then, Kaladin whispering, "One more try? I'm losing my grip on myself. Every time I try to save someone, the storm takes them. The Wretch always wins." A dried leaf is almost silly, right? But that's the reality of dealing with a dark mind space. You don't get cured by a miracle, you get saved by finding a microscopic reason to survive just one more second. Kaladin pulls his foot back, collapses into the mud, and chooses to breathe. It's messy, it's painful, and it is easily one of the most human moments in high fantasy history. Act 2. The Survivor Complex and Flawed Heroism. Alright, so Kaladin decides to live. Fantastic. Time to be a hero, put on a cape, and fly around, right? Well, not exactly, because trauma doesn't just vanish because you decide not to jump off a cliff. It mutters, it adapts, and it morphs into something else. In Kaladin's case, it morphs into a raging, borderline toxic savior complex. Kaladin takes leadership of Bridge 4 and eventually swears the second Radiant ideal. I will protect those who cannot protect themselves. On paper, it sounds like the ultimate noble vow, but psychologically, Kaladin is using this ideal as an emotional shield. Because he couldn't save his little brother Tien from being slaughtered on the battlefield, his brain overcorrects. He decides that no one around him is allowed to die, ever, or else it's his personal fault. He stops treating his men like fellow soldiers and starts treating them like fragile things that has to personally wrap in bubble wrap. And let's be real for a second. Kaladin is also incredibly petty and full of biases early on. He absolutely hates the light-eyed ruling class. And honestly, can you blame him? They betrayed his squad, stole his shard blade, and sold him into chains. He views the world in strict, stubborn black and white. Light eyes are arrogant, corrupt monsters. Dark eyes are honorable victims. But Sanderson doesn't let his characters stay in comfortable black and white boxes. Enter King Elokar. Elokar is a whiny, incompetent, paranoid ruler whose bad decisions literally ruined Kaladin's family. In words of Radiance, Kaladin is put in the position where he can step aside and let his former friend, Moshe, assassinate the king. Ever bitter, traumatized part of Kaladin's brain is screaming, "Let it happen. He deserves it." But then Kaladin looks at Elokar cowering in a dark hallway and he realizes a devastating truth. Elokar is just a broken, desperate guy who has no idea what he's doing, but he's trying his best anyways. He is Dalinar's Tien, To let him die out of personal hatred would be a total betrayal of what protection actually means. It would mean letting his bitterness override his mortality. So, wounded and bleeding, Kaladin stands between Moshe and the king, draws his sill blade, and screams the third ideal into the dark. I will protect even those I hate, so long as it is right. This is a massive turning point. The magic system in Stormlight is explicitly tied to psychological breakthroughs. He doesn't level up because he killed 1,000 enemies. He levels up because he chose to protect someone he despised. He shatters his own tribalism and grows up. Act 3. Processing grief and the group therapy paradigm. But the human mind can only take so much pressure before it cracks. By the time we get to Book 4, Rhythm of War, Kaladin is entirely spent. He's suffering from severe combat fatigue, hypervigilance, and what we would call complex PTSD. He starts freezing on the battlefield, trapped in waking nightmares. It gets so bad that High Prince Dalinar has to do something unprecedented in a fantasy epic. He permanently benches his star general. He tells Kaladin, "You're done fighting. Go figure out how to heal." And this is where the story takes a beautiful, deeply empathetic turn. Instead of wallowing in defeat, Kaladin goes back to his roots as a surgeon's apprentice. He looks around the magical advanced towers city of Irurithu and realizes a tragic flaw in their society. They have all the magical stormlight in the world to instantly knit flesh, mend bones, and heal physical scars, but they have absolutely nothing to touch the fractured mind. So, what does our high fantasy hero do? He invents group therapy. He gathers a group of traumatized, forgotten veterans, men who have been locked away in dark rooms because society thinks they're broken, and he just puts them in a circle and lets them talk. He uses his Windrunner surge of adhesion, which physically binds objects together in a spiritual way. He binds broken souls into a community. He teaches them that they aren't alone in the dark. But Kaladin still hasn't cured his own deepest wound, his over-responsibility. He still carries the ghosts of his little brother Tien like an anchor around his neck. During the intense climax of the occupation of Urithiru, Kaladin is pushed to the absolute edge. He is falling from the top of the tower, completely overwhelmed by grief, ready to let the wind take him. But in that moment, he experiences a surreal, beautiful vision of Tien. Tien hands him a small, colorful, polished rock. If you remember from Book 1, Tien used to collect those rocks just to make Kaladin smile. It's a perfect narrative and psychological callback. In modern trauma therapy, true healing doesn't mean forgetting the tragedy. It means integrating the memory into your life story as a completed past event rather than an active ongoing threat. Tien's spirit gives Kaladin permission to stop fighting a war that ended years ago. With tears streaming down his face as he plummets towards the ground, Kaladin finally speaks the hardest words of his entire life, the fourth radiant ideal. I accept that there will be those I cannot protect. Suddenly, thousands of windspren swarm around his falling body, locking together into a brilliant suit of living shard plate that instantly arrests his fall. He didn't unlock this ultimate armor by being an invincible warrior. He unlocked it by admitting his own human limitations. He surrendered the illusion of control, and in doing so, he finally set himself free. Act 4, Self-Preservation and Divine Ascension. Which brings us right back to this incredible artwork. Look at how he's positioned. He's sitting on top of a stone pillar looking out. Throughout the entire series, Kaladin has acted as a physical and emotional bridge for everyone else. He crossed the gaps so others could survive, but he never actually allowed himself to walk across to safety. He always treats himself like an expendable piece of hardware. But in the final act of his arc in Wind and Truth, Kaladin finally faces the ultimate hurdle. He journeys to Shinovar, confronts the deeply corrupted remnants of the past, and swears the elusive fifth ideal, the final ultimate rejection of his martyrdom complex. I will protect myself so that I can continue to protect others. Think about how profound that is. For 5 books, Kaladin thought that being a hero meant dying for his cause, but the ultimate stage of psychological recovery is realizing that you matter too. Self-preservation isn't the opposite of being a protector, it is the absolute foundation of it. If you burn yourself to ashes, keep others warm, eventually everyone freezes anyways. The moment he swears this ideal, the slave brand on his forehead, the visual symbol of his lifelong trauma, finally glows with pure light and completely dissolves. He's no longer a slave to his past. And then the unthinkable happens. The war goes completely sideways. The Stormfather is dead. Dalinar's grand plan fails. Taravangian ascends to a terrifying new level of divine power, and the world is plunged into an apocalyptic night of sorrows. The ancient immortal heralds look around the shattered battlefield, completely broken, and whisper, "We have lost. Honor is dead." But Kaladin just sighs, rubs the dirt out of his eyes, winces at his wounds, and slowly forces himself back up onto his feet, because that is what a bridge leader does. Yeah, honor is dead, but I'll see what I can do. When a desperate revised oath pact is proposed to bind the dark forces and save what's left of Roshar, the old heralds tremble at the thought of returning to their eternal torture. But Kaladin steps forward to take the vacant seat left by Jazirin. He doesn't do it out of guilt. He doesn't do it because he hates his life or wants to be a martyr. He steps forward as a fully healed, self-actualized man who chooses to protect because it is his passion, not his curse. And as his body transforms into a towering figure of pure, immortal light, he chooses a brand new title for himself. Welcome, Kaladin Stormblessed, Herald of Kings, Herald of Wind, Herald of Second Chances. And that is why Kaladin Stormblessed is one of the greatest characters ever written in the fantasy genre. He isn't inspiring because he can fly, and he isn't inspiring because he flies around with a glowing spear. He is inspiring because no matter how many times the wretch told him to give up, and no matter how dark the chasm got, he chose to take a breath and look the storm right in the eye and give himself and the world a second chance.